I let out a bitter laugh over the sink, writing it off as the slurred rambling of a drunk woman. By breakfast the next morning, I'd already filed the whole thing away in the mental trash can, but Vanessa hadn't. She never would. About 10 minutes later, just as I was buffing the last wine glass to a mirror shine, Vanessa pushed open the kitchen door and lounged against the frame, arms folded. She delivered her lines in that flat, clinical monotone you'd used to read off the casualties from a pile-up on the interstate. As if she'd been born knowing that life was a race she'd already lapped me in. Nora, between the two of us, there's only room for one winner. And it's never, ever, ever going to be you. You're always racing off to rescue some total stranger, who doesn't mean a damn thing to you. I laughed dryly and told her she'd had one too many. But her eyes were sharp as scalpels, boring into my face like she was dissecting me. That was the gulf between us. She could etch every cutting remark into her bones, while my head was stuffed with nothing but shift schedules, sign-off sheets, and ER admission logs. If I could, I'd fast-forward straight to that hospital lobby, my dear sister click-clacking toward me in her heels, deliberately pitching her voice loud enough for every patient hooked up to N4 to hear. Still flying solo, Nora. Look at you, what a train wreck. Daniel made the smartest call of his life when he dumped you. He's living his best life now. A chubby little boy with the woman you once called your ride-or-die bestie. Happy little family, just bubbling over with joy. Her eyebrows were practically levitating toward the ceiling, and our parents stood right behind her like a pair of custom-made stage props, not a single word of defense out of either of them. They just stood there, soaking in the sight of their precious baby girl grinding her big sister into dust in front of an audience. I locked eyes with her and said, my voice flat as a frozen lake, "Did that bitch tell you that herself?" Vanessa's lips curled into a victory smirk. She thought she'd won, thought that 3 years of scheming and backstabbing had finally torn my life out by the roots. But she had no clue that the truth she'd been peddling was gospel in her mouth and toilet paper in mine. In 5 minutes, the ex-husband she'd enshrined as a lovesick Prince Charming would push through that glass door, carrying evidence that would blow every lie she'd told over the past 3 years to smithereens. My name is Nora Bennett. I'm 35 years old. I need to start at the very beginning. If you want to understand why I was still smiling in that lobby that day, you first have to know what my family had been slinging at me over the previous 13 months, and how my dear sister had been quietly working behind my back for 3 solid years. I'm the chief nursing officer at Mercy Memorial Hospital in Charlotte, North Carolina, 11 years in the job. I manage 240 nurses, oversee a $28 million annual budget, and report directly to a 6-member board. But not one of those 6 suits ever asked, "Is your sister slowly trying to kill you?" Most mornings I'm at the hospital by 6:15, sometimes earlier. If a nurse walks off the floor while a critical patient is coding, that patient's life hangs in the balance. My job is to make sure nobody walks off. That's it. And that, apparently, makes me cold and heartless in my family's book. 11 Thanksgivings around my parents' table, and not once has anyone asked, "Are you tired?" Instead, every single year I get put on trial. My mother Patricia was convinced it was my career first, marriage second attitude that drove Daniel away. My father Robert always said I was born difficult. And my sister Vanessa delivered the final verdict: Daniel left you, and it was 100% your own damn fault. It's been 13 months since the divorce, and they all think the dust has settled, that their little girl came out on top. That's the script they wrote together, rehearsed at Thanksgiving, rehearsed at Easter, recited whether I was in the room or not. In that story, there's only ever one victim, and everyone's gotten used to heaping every ounce of blame onto my plate. My sister is a top-selling agent at Keller Williams Realty in Charlotte. She lives in a $920,000 house in Cotswold. Her husband Michael Reed is a chief physician at UNC Medical Center. They have 2 kids, Isabella, 10, and Noah, 7, both enrolled in private school in Myers Park. Since 2016, her Instagram has been fixed on a single hashtag, #girlmom. Every family holiday, she posts a perfect 4-shot bathed in warm porch light, captioning it with some saccharine line about grace and perseverance. My mother comments on every single post, practically swooning. Vanessa didn't just have the upper hand in this family, she'd been keeping score and winning against everyone since she was old enough to hold a crayon. My mother had a revolving set of ways to feed me the same line. Since the previous March, whenever we were alone, she'd start every conversation with the same 2 words, honey. In that soft southern way of keeping you at arm's length, honey was her cue that she was about to pour cold water on you. She used it on just about everyone. Honey, you have to understand that Daniel needs a gentler, more attentive partner. She said it at Thanksgiving. She said it at Easter. She said it again in her own kitchen in March, when I flew home for her 65th birthday. Every time, I sat there like a block of wood and let her tell me who I was. I'd learned long ago that the minute I argued back, I'd only confirm her verdict that I had a temper. In our family, any woman who argues is labeled difficult. Any woman who cries is a hot mess. And any woman who swallows every accusation with a faint smile isn't called gracious, she's called broken inside. No matter how I lived my life, in my mother's eyes it only proved I was a failure. So I stopped defending myself and let them say whatever they wanted. In that house, silence and retreat had always been the reasons they favored the other child. And for the longest time, I foolishly believed that silence meant I'd lost. Let me take you back to Thanksgiving 2013. I was 23 then, barely 18 months out of nursing school, working rotating night shifts in the ICU of a level 1 trauma center in Charlotte. Vanessa was 27, and in 2 weeks she'd meet Michael Reed. None of us knew that yet. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, Grandma, my father's mother, had passed away. Dad had drunk some red wine, not completely sloshed, but well on his way. After dinner, he carried a bottle into the living room and started rambling about his own father. He talked for a long time, and I heard every word from the kitchen sink where I was washing dishes. He used that low, gravelly tone that men in our family adopted when they thought they'd figured out the universe. Mom had already gone upstairs. Vanessa sat in an armchair nursing her whiskey, phone face down on the coffee table, pretending to listen. The reason I carved those words into my brain is that I heard them twice, once in that kitchen on Thanksgiving, and again 12.5 years later, on the night my old life came crashing down. He said, "You know what holds a family together? Endurance. Patience. Your grandfather always said that. Between you 2 sisters, whichever one can keep her marriage going to the finish line gets the old house in Raleigh and everything else. That's how you earn a legacy, that's how you prove you're more than just someone born with the family name." That wedding wasn't mine, it was Vanessa's, June 2014. She held it at the church in Raleigh where my mother used to go as a girl. She didn't ask me to be her maid of honor. Instead, she picked a sorority sister from Kappa Delta at Wake Forest, dressed in ivory. I was only in pale pink, stuck with the rest of the bridesmaids. Dad wept as he walked her down the aisle. Mom captured that moment and kept it in a silver frame on the mantelpiece for 12 years. Then came June 2015, my turn. I was 25, Daniel 27. He was a senior architect at Sotheby's Cornerstone Construction, and the gentlest man I'd ever been with. Mom said it would look odd not to make Vanessa my maid of honor, so she stood beside me. At the toast, she raised her champagne glass, beamed at Daniel, and said, "Daniel, thank you for putting up with our Nora. She's not exactly soft, but I trust you can bring out the softer side of her." Daniel just smiled then. He had no idea that toast was only the first nail in my sister's script. Christmas 2021, Mom sent out family holiday cards. She told me, "Honey, we just wanted a candid shot, nothing more." Daniel and I had flown in 2 days earlier, and spent the whole afternoon indoors. The card featured Vanessa, Michael, Isabella, and Noah, all lined up in front of their fireplace, everyone but me. When I opened the envelope, Daniel held the card in silence for a long time, then finally said, "Your mom's right, it's just a photo. Don't read too much into it." 2 years later, I finally understood, it wasn't that the photo didn't matter. It was that I'd been blind to who'd been holding the knife behind my back. Marriages are full of those tiny moments you barely register at the time. Only later do you realize, they were the first hairline cracks. In the autumn of 2022, Daniel came home from our hospital's fall gala, and casually mentioned that Vanessa had introduced him to a friend of hers, a name, Rachel. He asked, "Isn't she that friend of yours from Charlotte?" I said, "Yes, we used to be friends, but we lost touch after her first divorce." I didn't think much of it then. Later I found out that Rachel had been Vanessa's real estate client for over a year. Vanessa sold her a single-family home in Valentine, and then helped her buy a small condo in South Park. During the transactions, Vanessa learned that Rachel and I had been classmates at UNC Charlotte. At that gala, she deliberately brought Rachel along and walked her up to my husband's table, asking with an innocent smile, "Have you two met before?" But let me pull the timeline back further, to 2018. That was the year I first sensed, just faintly, that my sister's competitive streak wasn't childhood games. It was a snake, hissing in the dark for 3 years, just waiting to sink its fangs into my throat. That fishbone from the spring of 2018 lodged in my throat for 2 full months. I didn't track Vanessa's medical record access any further. I didn't ask my mother who'd really opened that box of textbooks. I didn't mention the anonymous email to Daniel. I chose to swallow it, like a stone dropped into the pit of my stomach, and pretend it didn't exist. One Friday afternoon in June, I got off work on time for once, a rarity. Driving through the shopping strip in South Park, I spotted my husband on the terrace of a cafe on the corner. Daniel was slouched in a wrought iron chair, an iced Americano in front of him. Across the table sat a woman, her profile turned to me, long chestnut waves, her left hand gesturing above the tabletop as she laughed, open and wide. Daniel was laughing too, that loose, unguarded laugh I hadn't seen at home in months. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I stepped on the gas and glided past that intersection like it was scenery that had nothing to do with me. That night, I got home to find Daniel already there, standing at the stove in a neatly tied apron, searing steaks, wine glasses and candles lined up on the counter. He heard me at the door and poked his head out from the kitchen, that cafe terrace smile still plastered on his face. "Got off early today," he said. "Surprise for you." I kicked off my shoes, walked over, and leaned against the counter, watching him flip the steaks. "That terrace seat at the cafe in South Park looked nice," I said. "We should go sometime." His hand paused, less than half a second. But I'd done 6 years of ICU night shifts. Half a second of hesitation in my eyes was sharper than any surveillance footage. "How do you know about that place?" He glanced back at me, his voice flat as if nothing had happened. "Drove by. Saw you sitting there," I said. "The woman across from you, long hair, big laugh." Daniel set down the spatula and turned to face me. The relaxed smile was gone, replaced by a guarded, slightly defensive look. That's Rachel, Vanessa's friend. Didn't you see the group text last week? Vanessa said Rachel just got divorced and needed cheering up, so I offered to chat about her new place. She does interior design. It's not what you're thinking. What I wanted to say was, I wasn't thinking anything. I hadn't even had time to think before you rushed to explain. And the more thorough your explanation, the more sediment there is at the bottom of that coffee cup. But I didn't say it. I just nodded, pulled a bottle of white wine from the fridge, twisted off the cap, and poured myself a glass. Sounds like you two had a good chat. We ate for 40 minutes, talking about his firm's next quarter bid on a commercial complex, and why our downstairs neighbor's dog barked every night at 11 on the dot. The steak was perfect, medium rare, with a nice sear. He really was a good husband. So good, I almost convinced myself that cafe scene was just my overactive imagination. But that night, lying in bed with my back to him, I listened to his breathing slow into sleep. I stared at the yellow streetlight leaking through the curtain crack, and suddenly remembered something. The wine he'd opened for that steak had come from the cabinet, but I never knew there was white wine on the lower shelf. A bottle he'd brought home from his company Christmas party last year. One I'd never seen him open. Why did he open it tonight? To pair with the steak? Or to mask something else? I swallowed that new fishbone too. Autumn 2018. October, when Charlotte starts to cool. Mercy Memorial launched its annual charity gala, and I was running it solo for the first time as CNO. The whole board was coming, plus several city health officials. I spent 3 straight weeks buried in logistics, seating charts, guest lists, run-throughs, answering emails even during meals. At 5 o'clock on gala day, I was backstage checking the projector when my phone buzzed. Vanessa's message: "I'll swing by and pick up Daniel tonight, if you don't mind. I'm showing a house nearby anyway." I stared at it for 5 seconds and typed back, "Fine." The gala started at 7. By 6:40, guests were streaming in, and I was at the registration desk, eyes scanning the entrance. At 6:55, Vanessa swept through the doors on my husband's arm, wearing a sapphire blue silk gown, her hair pinned up, pearl earrings catching the light just so. Daniel was in the charcoal suit I'd bought him, the tie I'd picked out, but standing next to her, their strides matched perfectly, like a pair who'd been dancing together for years. She glided to my table, released Daniel's arm, and leaned in close, her voice pitched for my ears only. "Don't be nervous, sis. I'm just delivering your husband safe and sound. You don't mind me not checking in advance, do you? I figured you were too busy to confirm." Her mascara glittered under the crystal chandeliers. Her smile was as sweet as a sugar-coated poison pill. "Thank you," I said. "You've been a big help. Your seat is ready, you're at the family table with Daniel." She blinked. She'd expected me to put her at the head table. She was a top agent, after all, and Michael's sister-in-law, but I'd parked her at the family table with the husbands of nurse managers, the fiancés of pharmacists, and assorted health insurance liaisons. Her pearl earrings didn't belong there at all. Her mouth twitched, a millimeter, no more. Daniel shot me a look, his lips parting slightly, but he said nothing, just steered Vanessa toward the family table. The gala went off without a hitch. The speeches landed, the donations came in, and the board chair gave me a personal shout-out in his closing remarks. I stood at the edge of the crowd with a flute of champagne, and watched Vanessa work the room, chatting up the nurse manager's husband, Daniel beside her, sometimes leaning in to catch her words, sometimes checking his phone. I thought of Grandma. If she was still here, what would she make of this scene? She'd probably lift her unsweetened tea and say, slow as molasses, "Some fish swim around a pot thinking they're having a fine time. They only start flopping when the water boils." I didn't know if I was the fish in the pot, or the one who could already see the flame. All I knew was that night, in the car on the way home, Daniel said to me, "Putting your sister at the family table, that felt deliberate, didn't it?" I watched the streetlights slide past the window and said, "Where do you think she'd have been more comfortable?" He fell silent. That was the first time I'd seen him choose silence between me and Vanessa. And in our family, silence was a stance. January 2019. I'd just turned 31. I worked a 12-hour shift on my birthday, and came home to cake and a card on the table. Daniel's handwriting, neat and careful. He said he loved my strength and independence, that I was the least like other women he'd ever met. I read the card twice, cut 2 slices, and gave him one. But I only ate 3 bites. It was too sweet, sweet enough to leave a bitter aftertaste in my mouth. That night I scrolled through Instagram, and saw Vanessa's latest post. A photo of her, Rachel, and Daniel at a new Japanese spot downtown, taken the night before, the evening of my birthday eve. The caption read, "Date night with my bestie and her brilliant architect friend. Seiken sushi, life is good." Daniel sat between Rachel and Vanessa, a glass of sake in his hand, wearing that loose, unguarded smile I hadn't seen in too long. I turned off the screen and rolled over, facing the ceiling. Daniel was already asleep, breathing steady and even. I didn't wake him. I didn't screenshot. I just closed my eyes and counted every inch of that fishbone, from head to tail, in the dark. January 2019. 11 months until Daniel first said, "Maybe we need to talk." 23 months until he officially moved out of our shared apartment. 47 months until that afternoon in the hospital lobby, the one the whole family would witness. I was like an audience member who'd stumbled into a theater and already seen the ending. I knew exactly how the plot would collapse, and still I had to stay in my seat, watching myself walk toward it, frame by frame. And Vanessa, she was in the projection booth, tweaking every reel to fit her version. February 2019. The dead of night, jolted awake by my phone. Mercy Memorial ICU on the line. Night shift supervisor Susan, "Nora, the patient in bed 3 is in VFib, we're coding, but that special meds authorization you signed. I can't find the original. The digital file won't open." I threw off the covers, bare feet hitting the cold floor, the shock climbing straight up my spine. My office, left drawer, 3rd folder, red label. "Go get it. I'll call security to let you in." After I hung up, I didn't go back to bed. Daniel was still asleep, blanket pulled to his chin, curled into a quiet arc. I stood in the doorway watching his back and realized his sleeping position had changed. He used to lie flat, one arm stretched toward my pillow. Now he curled away from me, a whole person's width between us. When did that distance start? I couldn't say. But it was there, like damp creeping under wallpaper. You don't have to peel it back, it's already there. March 2019. A weekend morning. Daniel said, "Rachel did the soft furnishing for 2 of our model units. The client loved it. The director wants to sign her as a long-term design consultant." I was buttering toast, the knife pausing a beat above the bread. "So she's your firm's partner now?" "Pretty much." He sipped his coffee, eyes on his phone. "We have your sister to thank for that. If she hadn't introduced us, the director never would have thought of outsourcing interior design." "Tell her I'm grateful," I said, setting the buttered toast in front of him. "Grateful for her being so helpful with your career." Daniel glanced up at me, maybe trying to parse if there was a barb in that, but he let it go. He just said, "That sounded a little sharp," and went back to his phone. I bit into the toast and tasted nothing. After that, Rachel's name began entering my life at a slow, steady frequency. She appeared in the group photos from Daniel's company retreats. She was on the cup sleeve of the milk tea he brought home after late nights. Rachel's recommendation, it said. She cropped up in small talk. Rachel says there's a new building supply store up north. Rachel recommended a cleaning lady, Rachel. Every time he said her name, the tone was casual, as if she were a harmless colleague, an ordinary friend. But that crack inside me kept leaking. Not anger, a dull ache, like a wet paper towel slowly pressed over your mouth and nose. You can still breathe, but each breath costs a little more. April 2019. Mercy Memorial's annual Nurses' Day Awards ceremony. I was giving the opening speech. My parents came, Patricia in a lilac cardigan in the second row, Robert beside her. Vanessa showed up too, invited as a family representative, after donating supplies to the nursing department last year. I stood at the podium, scanning the crowd, and precisely zeroed in on Vanessa's face in that row. She was leaning sideways, talking to Daniel, her lips almost at his ear. Daniel leaned forward slightly, a smile on his lips, as if she'd told a joke only the two of them shared. My gaze held for less than a second, but the second half of my speech sped up by half a beat. The weight I'd meant to give to thank every nurse for her steadfastness slipped into a rushed landing. Afterward, I went backstage to grab my coat. Patricia followed me in, closed the door softly, and said, in that tone she used to comfort heartbroken teenagers, "Sweetie, your speech today was a little fast. You should slow down, it makes you sound more commanding." "Got it," I said. She didn't leave. She stood there, clutching her cream-colored clutch, hesitating for 2 or 3 seconds. "How are things with Daniel?" I looked at her. Her face wore the standard maternal concern, the faint crease between her brows, her lips gently pursed, but in her eyes I could see her own construction of me, the daughter who'd pushed her husband away with work, who needed advice on how to be softer, less overbearing. "Good," I said. "Work's fine." "His fine." She nodded, satisfied that I'd conformed to her script, and left. I leaned back against the dressing table, watching the door close, and mentally finished that sentence for myself, "I'm fine. Everyone's fine. Only Vanessa is too good. So good it feels like she's living my life in my place." One evening in May, Daniel's meeting got cancelled unexpectedly, and he came home early. I was at my desk in the study, wrestling with the roster. He pushed the door open, set a glass of red wine beside my laptop, and pulled a chair up next to me. After a long silence, maybe 15 seconds, he said, "Nora, we need to talk." I swiveled to face him. His collar was unbuttoned, his hair messy, he'd clearly rehearsed this opening in his head. "I feel like we've drifted," he said. "Not anyone's fault, it just happened. You're at the hospital all the time, and I've got my own pace. I'm not pointing fingers. But I think we need to face it." I looked at him. What rose in me wasn't sadness. It was a strange calm, like standing on a riverbank you've known was about to break, finally hearing the first chunk of earth fall. "What do you think we should do?" I asked. He leaned back, sipped his wine. "I don't want a divorce, don't get me wrong. I just think, could we keep one evening a week just for us? No work, no phones." I said yes. That night we watched an old movie on the couch, his arm around my shoulders, my head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. He fell asleep halfway through, his breathing long and even. I carefully lifted his arm, went to the kitchen for water, and stood at the window looking out at the empty street. He said he didn't want to divorce me. I believed he was sincere when he said it. But a sincere man can still be unfaithful. He might not even recognize the thing he's doing as betrayal. He only knew Rachel was interesting, that she understood him, that she made him laugh. He only knew Vanessa was warm and thoughtful, the kind of sister who only wants what's best for you. He didn't know, or didn't want to know, that those two together were slowly prying me off him, inch by inch. June. My 32nd birthday. Daniel gave me a necklace, a thin chain with a tiny sapphire pendant. He fastened it around my neck, his fingers cool against my skin. He said, "I hope I get to spend every birthday with you." I thanked him and kissed his forehead. After he left for work, I stood at the bathroom mirror, looked at the sapphire, then took it off, put it back in its box, and tucked it into the deepest drawer of my closet. Then I opened my phone, a throwaway account I'd just made, and scrolled through Rachel's Instagram. Her early posts were mostly soft furnishing projects, cafe check-ins, travel photos. Starting in March 2018, a pattern emerged. A background figure blurred at a distance, Daniel's frame. A quick story showing a hand across a table, the cuff of his favorite khaki jacket. A location tag at the coffee shop beneath his firm's office, captioned, "Hanging with a friend working late, best oat latte of the day." Nothing overt. No couple shots. But those fragments pieced together into a map, and every road on it led to my husband. I took 9 screenshots, filed them in an encrypted folder alongside the 2018 medical record access log. I stared at the folder name, Fishbone, and took a long breath. I knew the first half of this battle was lost. But the second half, that was mine to fight. September 2019. The last weekend before fall, Patricia hosted a backyard barbecue at my parents' house, a few relatives, a handful of neighbors. 4 o'clock, the sun still high, smoke from the grill mixing with the scent of bell peppers and charred fat. Daniel stood at the pit in a dark blue polo, flipping patties. Vanessa stood beside him in a wide-brimmed straw hat, a glass of lemonade in hand. Half an arm's length between them, but every time Daniel turned the meat, Vanessa shifted just so, letting the breeze carry the smoke away from him instead of into his face. A tiny gesture. Too small for anyone else to notice. But I saw it from the patio steps, like a spider drawing in its web. My mother came over with a fruit salad, followed my gaze toward the grill, and said, almost to herself, "Vanessa and Daniel do look rather nice together, don't they?" I turned to her. She wasn't looking at me, just fussing with the cherry tomatoes in the bowl, her manicured nails neat as always, her tone as light as if she'd said, "Nice weather we're having." "Mom," I said. She looked up. "You used to say Grandma's condition for the Raleigh house was whoever keeps their marriage intact gets the estate. Do you still think that standard applies today?" She blinked, caught off guard. She set the salad bowl on the table, wiped her hands on her apron, and gave me that perpetually gracious smile. "Oh honey, that's your grandfather's old talk. We don't hold to that anymore." "Then what do we hold to?" I asked. She didn't answer. She patted my hand and turned to greet a neighbor. But in that half second of her turning away, I caught something flicker at the back of her eyes. Not guilt. Not shame. Something I knew too well, the soft evasion she reserved for things that ought not be discussed. In that backyard, smoke rose from the grill, children's laughter rippled across the lawn, Vanessa's laughter chimed beside Daniel. Everything looked normal as a carefully staged family portrait. But I knew the back of that picture had a line written on it. A line only I could read. That night, after Daniel stepped into the shower, I sat on the edge of the bed and scrolled through my phone. A message from an unknown number popped into my notifications. "Nora, it's Rachel. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I'd like to talk to you in person. Some things you might have gotten wrong. I don't want to cause Daniel any trouble. I stared at the message 3 times. Then I typed back, okay. We met 3 days later, at a quiet brunch place downtown. I arrived 15 minutes early and took a booth against the wall, facing the entrance. Rachel came in on time, white linen shirt, light makeup, her hair falling smooth over her shoulders. She smiled when she saw me, a smile that held no defiance, just a touch of nervous placation. She sat down, clasped her hands on the table, and said, "Thank you for agreeing to see me." I looked at her. Not in anger, not with hostility, just the cool, dispassionate gaze of someone placing a patient under a surgical light. "What did you want to talk about?" I asked. She took a breath, like she was steadying herself. "I want to tell you that there's nothing going on between Daniel and me. We're friends. He helped me get some work leads. I helped him with design advice. Vanessa did make the introduction, but..." "But what?" She bit her lip. "But Vanessa told me some things about you. She said, you weren't really invested in Daniel. That you were always working and didn't pay attention to his feelings. She said she just wanted to help him find someone to talk to." It took me a while to realize that some of the things she said weren't quite right. My fingers rested on the rim of my coffee cup, still. "And what are you telling me this for?" She dropped her gaze, her fingers twisting around her water glass. "I want out. I don't want to be stuck in the middle. I already went through a divorce, because I got tangled in something messy. I'm not doing it again. Daniel's a good person, but he's not mine. I know that." Outside, pigeons rose from the square in a clatter of wings. The sky was so blue it looked fake. I watched her lowered eyelids and the faint tremor at her fingertips and realized something. She might be telling the truth. She might genuinely have been used as Vanessa's pawn. But even if she were, what difference did it make? Daniel had already developed feelings for her, even if he'd never crossed a line, those feelings were real. And Vanessa's web had already tightened too many knots. I raised my coffee and took a sip, the bitterness spreading from my tongue to my throat. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "But I suggest you cut off contact with Daniel. However Vanessa spins it, he's my husband. That's my bottom line." Rachel nodded, her eyes reddening a little. I stood up and, as I stepped out of the booth, pressed a light hand on her shoulder, so light it might have been comfort, or might have been dismissal. Outside, I sat on a bench for a long time, watching the traffic lights cycle from red to green and back again, crowds streaming past. The sun was warm on my shoulders, but my spine was cold. I finally understood something. Vanessa had never been afraid of me exposing her. She was afraid of me not breaking. That's why she kept escalating. One Rachel wasn't enough. She needed mother's approval, Daniel's wavering, and every family dinner's carefully honed cruelty, like arrows shot from a bow she thought nobody could trace. I stood up and walked toward the parking lot. That night, I came home to Daniel watching a game on the couch. I sat down beside him, leaned into his shoulder, and breathed in the familiar smell of detergent on his collar. He kept his eyes on the screen, but slipped an arm around me. "How was your day?" he asked. "Good," I said. "Met someone. Talked a bit." "Who?" "A friend." He didn't push. The TV commentator's voice filled the living room. I closed my eyes against his shoulder and listened to that heartbeat that was drifting further and further away from mine. September 2019. 10 months until he would first say, "I want to move out for a while." 7 months until I had solid enough evidence to lay it all in front of my mother. And 40 months until the hospital lobby, the showdown everyone would witness. In the dark, I opened my eyes and sent a silent message to the hollow space where Vanessa's scheming lived. "You've been building this web for so long. You'd better hope it's strong. Because when I tear it down, there won't be a single thread left. March 2020. The pandemic hit like a bucket of dirty water dumped from the sky, and nobody had time to grab an umbrella. Mercy Memorial switched to wartime footing within a week. PPE ran low, staffing schedules collapsed, and the ER waiting area was hastily converted into a fever triage station. I worked 14 to 16 hours a day, clocking 23 straight shifts before my first day off. In those weeks I barely looked at my phone. I missed every message in the family group chat, missed Vanessa's quarantine cooking videos, missed Patricia's daily reminders to stay safe, darlings. I missed more than that. I only learned later that while I was trapped at the hospital in full PPE, counting seconds just to use the bathroom, Vanessa delivered care packages to my house every week, cartons of eggs, bags of flour, bags of oranges, each with a handwritten note. Extra for my brother-in-law. She never once ran into me. I wasn't home. She timed every delivery for when Daniel was there. One night in April, I dragged my leaden legs home. Daniel sat in the living room scrolling on his tablet. On the coffee table sat an insulated container, lid half open, steaming tomato beef stew still warm inside. Beside it lay a sticky note in Vanessa's handwriting. Made too much, thought my brother-in-law could use some. You're working hard, sis, take care. I stood in the foyer staring at that bowl of stew, the strap marks from my mask still pressed into my cheeks, my hair flattened by my cap, looking like a crumpled rag. Daniel glanced up, set his tablet aside. You're back. There's dinner in the kitchen, I'll heat it up for you. Who brought the stew? I asked. He paused, weighing his words. Vanessa dropped it off this afternoon. She said you probably weren't eating, so I should save you some. How long was she here? Not long. Just handed it over at the door and left. His answer came too smoothly. Like he'd rehearsed it. I walked over, picked up the container, snapped the lid shut, and shoved it into the back of the fridge. From now on, if she brings anything, don't accept it. Daniel straightened up on the sofa, frowning. What's that supposed to mean? She's your sister. She's bringing food during a pandemic. Do you really need to be that guarded? I'm not guarding against food, I said, bracing my hands on the counter edge, my nails digging into my palms. I'm guarding against her spending more time on you than I do. Silence in the kitchen for 3 seconds. The pendant light cast a cold white line between us. Daniel stood, his voice lower now, the weary tone of someone who doesn't want to fight. Nora, you're exhausted. I know the hospital's been brutal, but you don't have to take it out on Vanessa. She hasn't done anything wrong. I looked at him. In that moment I wanted to ask, do you know she accessed my medical records? Do you know she orchestrated every step of the Rachel introduction? Do you know how many stories she's told Mom about my character flaws? But I didn't ask. Because I knew that right now, in his mind, anything I said would sound like paranoia from an overworked, stressed-out woman. Vanessa's greatest power was making the truth sound like madness. I said only, then tell her to stop coming. We don't need it. I turned and walked into the bathroom, closed the door, and let the shower run hot over my shoulders. I stood under the spray, staring at the grout between the tiles, and remembered the final line of that anonymous email from 2018. She's already decided to find your husband's next woman. Back then I'd thought it impossible. 2 years later, she'd found Rachel. That still wasn't enough. She kept manufacturing coincidental encounters, planting seeds in Daniel's mind. Your sister doesn't understand you. But I do. The hot water scalded my back, but I felt cold. Mid-May. The pandemic eased slightly, and the hospital brought back rotating days off. I spent my first full weekend at home, sitting on the balcony soaking up the afternoon sun. Daniel worked from the study, video calls bleeding through the sliding door. I could hear his occasional laughter, light, easy laughter, the kind he could give a computer screen. I didn't eavesdrop on who he was talking to. I just sat there with my eyes closed, letting the sun paint the inside of my eyelids a warm orange blur. That night after dinner, Daniel said, "I might need to move to an apartment near the office for a while. The firm is pulling a team together for a proposal deadline, and the commute is just too much." I put down my chopsticks. "How long?" "Maybe 1 or 2 months, depending on progress." "Which apartment?" "Send me the address." He glanced at me, a flash of hesitation in his eyes. "It's that short stay near the office. I'll get you the room number." I said okay. He was lying. I knew he was lying, not because I'd caught him in something concrete, but because when he said, "I'll get you the room number," his eyes drifted away from mine, landing on the salt shaker at the edge of the table. I'd known him for 7 years. Every time he made a promise he wasn't ready to keep, he looked away. I didn't call him out. I just got up, loaded his plates into the dishwasher, and sat back down with my book. That night, after he fell asleep, I opened his laptop. I'd never asked for his password, but I remembered it, our wedding date. He'd set it himself, once saying, "I'll never forget that." I typed it in. The screen lit up. I didn't scroll through his messages or his photos. I just opened his recent location history. That night, the coordinates showed he'd spent 3.5 hours at an address on Linden Avenue. Not our house. Not his office. I closed the laptop and put it back. I sat on the edge of the bed and watched him for a long time. His profile in the moonlight was still, a slice of shadow across his nose, his breathing quiet and steady, as if nothing had happened. I said to him in my head, "Daniel, I'm giving you one last chance. Tell me yourself." He didn't. One evening in early June, I left work early and drove past 852 Linden Avenue. A 3-story beige apartment building, ivy crawling halfway up the brick, a small flower shop on the ground floor. I didn't stop, just coasted past slowly enough to see the second-floor window facing south. The white blinds were half open, the curtains pale blue. Exactly like the ones in our bedroom. I pulled back onto the road, shifted gears, and drove away. Not a single tear. My eyes were dry, my throat dry, my whole body like a machine running without oil, every joint grinding. That night Daniel came home with flowers, white daisies, in a glass bottle on the kitchen windowsill. He said, "Saw them at the flower shop on my way back." I ladled out his soup and sat across from him as he drank. He always blew on it twice, before sipping from the left rim. A habit that hadn't changed in 7 years. I watched him bow his head over the bowl and realized a brutal truth. Even if he'd spent 3.5 hours somewhere else, even if he was slowly climbing off my boat and onto another, the way he ate his soup was still the same. People's habits don't lie. But people do. "Daniel," I said. He looked up. "Is there anything you want to tell me?" He blinked, setting the bowl down. "Like what?" "Anything. Something you think I should know. Or something you think I don't know yet. Big or small." He stared at me for a long time. Summer breeze through the kitchen window rustled the daisies, a petal or two drifting onto the counter. He finally said, "No. I don't have anything to hide." I said, "Good." That night I lay in bed, listening to his familiar breathing, and kept my eyes open until dawn. I knew I didn't need to wait for, when he tells me himself, anymore. He never would. He might have even convinced himself that he just needed space for work, that Rachel was only a friend, that Vanessa was just a caring sister, that moving out was just project-related. He could lie to himself forever. I couldn't. Late June. I drove to my parents' house on a weekend. Patricia was in the kitchen peeling peaches. I leaned against the counter and watched her. Morning light slanted in, catching the faint brown spots on her hands, the marks of age. "Mom," I said. "What if I told you Vanessa has been systematically sabotaging my marriage? What would you think?" Her peeling knife paused for a moment, then continued. "Honey, why would you think that? Just answer me. What would you think?" She dropped the peeled peach into a glass bowl, wiped her hands on a towel, and turned to face me. Her expression wasn't angry, wasn't shocked, just weary tolerance, as if soothing a child having a tantrum. "Nora, you girls have always been too competitive. But you're in your 30s now. You need to let go of this who's right, who's wrong obsession. Vanessa has a strong personality, but she means no harm. Don't you think you're being a little unfair to her?" I looked down at my fingers folded on the counter. She accessed my medical records. Patricia's face flickered. "What?" "Valentine's Day 2018. She used a real estate seminar as cover, logged into our hospital's system from a public conference room, and pulled my personal medical file. She found the counseling referral from 2 years earlier. Then she brought it up at a family dinner, mentioning mental health benefits right in front of me. She was warning me. Mom was silent for a few seconds. Her well-manicured hands gripped the counter, knuckles faintly white. "You're sure it was her?" I checked the login IP. "I have screenshots." Patricia said nothing for a long time. Then she spoke, words I'll never forget. She said, "Sweetheart, even if what you're saying is true, what good does it do to make a scene? She's your sister. Family shame shouldn't be aired. You have proof, but what are you going to do? Sue her? Let the whole of Charlotte know our family has a mess like this?" I stared at her, realizing I didn't recognize this woman. She didn't love me less. She loved appearances more than anything. "I'm not going to sue her," I said. "I just wanted to know, now that you know, whose side you're on." Patricia reached out and took my wrist, her grip light as a teacup handle. "I'm on both of your sides. A mother doesn't choose." I pulled my hand back. "You chose. You've chosen since she was 5. Then I turned and walked out of that kitchen. Behind me, my mother let out a soft sigh, like a drop of water hitting hot oil, just a sizzle, then nothing. July. Daniel officially moved to the short stay, one suitcase in hand, his laptop, a few shirts, a toiletry kit. He said, "The project will end and I'll be back," kissed my forehead at the door, got in his car, and drove off. I stood on the doorstep watching that grey sedan disappear at the end of the street. The sun was fierce on the back of my neck. I went inside, closed the door, walked into our bedroom, and straightened every empty hanger on his side of the closet. Then I sat on the floor, back against the bed frame, and called the hospital staffing office. "Put me on more night shifts next week." "Are you sure? You've been running high intensity for 2 months." "Yes." After I hung up, I sat there watching the clock hand tick forward 1 minute at a time. 3:17 p.m. sunlight had slid from the window onto the floor, a warm golden square. I didn't cry. I'd stopped crying over this long ago. I only recorded every word he said, every glance, every hesitation, into the folder called Fishbone. They'd all come out at the final reckoning, one word at a time. July 2020. Daniel moved out. 33 months until the hospital lobby. My counterattack had only just begun. August 2020. The hottest days of a Charlotte summer, the air like a damp blanket. I stepped out of the ER for air one day, downed half a bottle of water in the stairwell's shade, and realized something: the screenshots and records I had were still just leads, not proof. The medical record access log proved a terminal had logged in, not that Vanessa had been the one at it. Rachel's messages proved closeness, not Vanessa's orchestration. I needed Vanessa's own words, recorded. From that week on, I kept my phone's voice recorder running at every family event, or any gathering where Vanessa was present. At first I didn't steer the conversation, just let her talk. A Sunday lunch in September, Mom made honey-baked ham, everyone at the table. Vanessa sat across from me in a cream-colored dress, looking like she'd just stepped off a magazine spread. When Mom asked why Daniel hadn't come, Vanessa cut in before I could speak. He's been buried in a huge project. He told me it's locked in through the end of the year. And my sister's busy too, so they're doing the whole independent, but respectful thing, which is really healthy. She placed extra emphasis on respectful, like frosting on a cake. I hit the record button under the table. So you talk to him often? I asked, reaching for a slice of ham with studied calm. Not that often, she said with a wave of her hand. I just send him a few easy recipes now and then. He's living alone, can't be eating takeout all the time. You don't mind, do you? Not at all, I said. With all this care you're giving him, I should be thanking you. My mother gave a satisfied nod, as if enjoying a sisterly harmony performance. Robert carved his ham in silence, long checked out of the women's conversations. My phone screen lay under the tablecloth, the red recording light blinking, swallowing Vanessa's casual mention: living alone, can't be eating takeout all the time. She'd just reminded everyone that Daniel had moved out, and she hadn't called him my brother-in-law. She called him he. A subtle shift, as if she'd grown used to thinking of him as a separate man, not my husband. After the meal, I helped my mother clear dishes. Vanessa stepped outside to take a call. I left my phone on the drain board, face down, still recording. A few minutes later she came back in. Mom had gone to pick rosemary from the yard, leaving just the two of us in the kitchen. Vanessa leaned against the dishwasher and said in an offhand, gossipy tone, "Oh, by the way, Rachel moved to Atlanta last month, did you know?" "No," I said. "We're not close. She said she wanted to say goodbye to you, but couldn't reach you. She seemed a little upset. Said some odd things about feeling guilty." Vanessa tilted her head, lashes casting tiny shadows under the kitchen lights. I couldn't imagine what she'd have to feel guilty about. I turned to face her, bracing my hands on the counter edge. "Do you think she should feel guilty?" Vanessa laughed, a "what are you even saying" laugh. "Why would she? There's nothing between you, right? She just did a few design projects for Daniel. You can't hold that against her, can you?" I nodded and gave her a small smile. "You're right." I loaded the dishes, closed the dishwasher, washed my hands, and slipped my phone into my pocket. Later, in the car, I replayed that recording. The conviction in her voice when she said, "She just did a few design projects," too certain, as if she already knew every detail of Rachel and Daniel's connection. A casual matchmaker wouldn't know that level of detail. Vanessa did. October. I reached out to an old college contact, Carter, a former detective now running a private investigation firm. I asked him to pull Vanessa's real estate transaction records from the past 2 years, under the vague excuse of personal financial concerns. 2 weeks later, he sent me a 30-plus page PDF. I spent 3 nights going through it line by line. Most were clean deals, sale prices, commissions, fees. But one stood out. November 2019, Vanessa facilitated the sale of a single-family home in Southeast Charlotte. The seller was an elderly woman named Margaret Hollis. The buyer was an LLC whose registered agent was Daniel K. Wilson. My husband's name. I stared at that line for a long time. The house sold for $670,000, bought through Daniel's company. But the transaction notes had an added clause. The down payment came from third-party gift, the donor's initials VW. Daniel bought a house with my sister's gift, and I knew nothing about it. I zoomed in, checked and double-checked, not a namesake coincidence. The LLC's registered address was Daniel's firm's floor, and his signature was on the incorporation documents. I recognized the slant of his last name. That night at 1:47 a.m., I sat in my study staring at the screen and felt something crack in my chest. Not anger, something colder. The feeling of being entirely excluded from the decisions that shaped my life. They bought a house. He and my sister. Behind my back. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark until the sky beyond the window bled pale crabshell blue. At dawn I called Carter. Find out if anyone's living in that house. 2 days later, he came back. Utilities had been active since January 2020, registered to Daniel K. Wilson. But the email associated with the water bill, a domain I'd seen too many times, belonged to Rachel H. Rachel was living in a house Daniel owned. Bought with Vanessa's money. I sat in my office staring at that message, piecing it together. Vanessa gave Daniel the money. Daniel bought the house. Rachel moved in. And I, his legal wife, didn't even know the house existed. Legally, that was concealment of marital assets. Morally, it was betrayal. But in Vanessa's script, it was, you had it coming. November. A week before Thanksgiving, I posted in the family group chat. I'll bring a dish this year. No need to set a place for me. Mom replied quickly, oh honey, since it's just you, don't bother, we've got everything. Vanessa didn't reply. Thanksgiving Day. I arrived at my parents' house an hour early with a whole roast turkey and a pumpkin pie. When I carried the tray into the kitchen, Vanessa stood at the stove whisking gravy. She raised an eyebrow at the sight of me, then fixed on her sweet smile. Wow, sis, you made a turkey. I didn't think you ever cooked. Once in a while, I said, setting the tray on the counter. Some things you can't always delegate to others. Her whisk hand paused, then resumed. That year's table was a little fuller than usual. Vanessa had brought 2 guests, a young couple she called important clients. I sat at the far end, opposite them, Robert on my right, an empty seat on my left, Daniel's usual spot. Patricia at the head of the table never once looked at that empty seat. She veered around it like a piece of broken glass. Midway through the meal, Vanessa introduced her clients around the table. This is my mom Patricia, my dad Robert, and this, her hand landed on me, she paused a beat, then smiled, is my sister Nora. She's in healthcare, works all the time, so it's rare she's home. Rare she's home. 5 words that summed her up. She'd just defined me as absent. A sister's pity. I didn't smile or argue. I just took a small sip of my wine and said, to the couple across the table, quietly, I'm Chief Nursing Officer at Mercy Memorial. I do work long hours, but I'm at this table every Thanksgiving. The turkey you're eating, I brined at 5 this morning. Hope you enjoy it. Vanessa's smile froze for a fraction of a second. She hadn't expected me to take the conversational lead and subtly correct her narrative. The wife of the couple said politely, Chief Nursing Officer. That's impressive. Must be exhausting. I said, it is. But I have family who help carry some of the load, like my sister, She's always remembering to send soup to my husband and set up outings with friends. Sometimes she's more attentive than I am. I really appreciate her. I drew out that last sentence slowly, each word like a sugar cube in tea, and watched Vanessa's complexion shift from pink to a faint ivory. She understood. No one else at the table did, only her. After the meal, I stood on the porch pulling on my coat. Vanessa followed me out, stopping 3 steps behind. Her voice dropped, sharp, stripped of pretense. Who were you performing for tonight? I turned to face her. The streetlight cut a sharp line across her face, half lit, half shadow. Performing? I was just stating facts. You delivered soup, you introduced friends, you paid the down payment, you've done so much. I had to thank you publicly. She went still. The porch wind lifted her hair. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Down payment. 2 words that told her. I knew about the house. I knew Rachel was in it. I knew how much she'd paid. She was silent for a few seconds. Then she laughed, not a sweet laugh, but a thin, cold thing plastered over skin. Do you know how that house title is signed? She said. Daniel never put your name on it. His name, all the way. You call it marital property, but whose name is on the paper, sis? You don't even have a bargaining chip. She brushed past me and pushed back inside. Warm air rolled out through the gap, carrying the smell of roast turkey and pumpkin pie. I stood on that porch, pulling my coat tight against the December wind. Then I pulled out my phone, opened the voice recorder, and hit stop. She'd said enough. Daniel never put your name on it, that was a statement I could use. I got in the car, started the engine, and cranked the heat. The dashboard's blue light lit my face as I stared at the condensation on the windshield, and I remembered Grandma's last words at the hospital. She'd held my hand, barely a squeeze, and said, Nora, remember this, the most valuable thing a person owns isn't houses or land. It's whether they've left themselves a way out. You need to make yourself a way out. Grandma, I have one now. The winter after that recording, Vanessa and I didn't exchange a single word. After she brushed past me on the porch that Thanksgiving night, we swam like 2 fish frozen beneath the same sheet of ice, visible to each other, but never breaking the surface again. She didn't text me. She didn't tag me in the family group chat. She even happened to come down with a fever on the night of Mom's Christmas Eve dinner. I knew it wasn't a fever. She was waiting for Daniel to make the first move. January 2021. Charlotte got its one snow of the year, a thin layer on the grass that melted into slush by noon. That day Daniel asked me to meet him at a cafe downtown. He'd picked a booth in the back, 2 cups of Americano on the table, one half empty, the other untouched. I was 7 minutes late. When I pushed through the door, he was looking down at his phone, brow furrowed. He looked up, saw me, and pulled out my chair, a gesture he'd done for 7 years, as natural as breathing. I sat down across from him. Silence stretched between us for a good 15 seconds, the steam from the coffee cups curling up and dissipating. Nora, he said. There are some things I need to clear up. Go ahead. He took a breath, clasped his hands on the table, knuckles whitening. I think our marriage has run into a fundamental problem. It's not about who's right or wrong, it's the whole direction. I tried adjusting. I tried communicating. But what? I can't go back to how we used to be. He lifted his gaze to mine, and I saw a kind of exhaustion I'd never seen before, not from work, but from being pulled in 2 directions for too long. I met someone. She makes me feel like I'm actually seen. I know it's wrong, but I don't want to lie to you. I studied his face, the face I'd looked at for 7 years. A faint line beneath his right eye, the one that crinkled when he smiled. I used to find it endearing. Now it just looked like a thin blade. "It's Rachel," I said. A statement, not a question. He blinked, then nodded. "You figured it out?" "I didn't figure it out," I said. "I've known for a while." I pulled out my phone, tapped a few times, and slid the screen across the table toward him. November 2019. You formed an LLC and bought a house in Southeast Charlotte. The down payment came from Vanessa's gift. The title is in your name only. Rachel moved in the day the utilities were turned on. Do you understand what that means? Daniel stared at the screen. His face went from confusion to pallor, then from pallor to a gray so pale it looked nearly transparent. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Finally, he croaked. "How did you find out?" "That doesn't matter." I pulled the phone back. "What matters is that you concealed marital assets. That's grounds for a fault-based divorce filing. I'm not threatening you. I'm telling you that I know everything. You don't need to make up any more explanations." He dropped his head into his hands, shoulders slumping. Low jazz played in the background. At the next table, a pair of college kids were huddled over the same phone, giggling. Their world was sealed behind a glass wall from ours. "Your sister," he finally said, his voice raw. "She told me you'd already checked out of the marriage. That all you cared about was work. That you'd told your colleagues I was dead weight. She said you'd been planning a divorce for a while, just waiting for the right time to take as much as you could." I took a sip of the now cold Americano, and let the bitterness coat my tongue. "When did she tell you that?" "Fall 2019. Around your birthday." "So when you moved to Short Stay, was that really about the project?" He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Not entirely. Vanessa said you needed space to figure out if you even wanted this marriage. She said if I stepped back, you'd realize how much I mattered." I don't know why I believed her. Looking back, every step was her pushing me. I watched him in silence. Was his regret real? Maybe some of it. But the truth was, at every turn where he could have chosen me over her fiction, he'd chosen her. Once is a slip. Twice is bad luck. 3 times is a choice. "Daniel," I said, setting down the cup. "When you bought that house with her money, did you ever stop to think about where I stood legally?" He didn't answer. I stood up, grabbing my coat from the back of the chair. "I accept your offer to divorce. But on my terms. That house gets split as marital property, whether you tell her I agreed or not. I've already hired a lawyer. Carter helped me trace every transaction, every gift receipt, every corporate filing. Your down payment came from a third-party gift from Vanessa. But since we were married at the time, that gift may be considered prejudicial to my spousal rights. You'd better get a lawyer too, so you know what you're up against." I turned and walked out. The cold air hit me like a wall as I pushed through the door, whipping my scarf across my shoulder. I heard Daniel call my name behind me, "Nora." A short, panicked syllable, like he was asking how I could just leave, or how I could be so calm. I didn't look back. The next day, my lawyer sent a formal letter to Daniel's email, with a copy to the registered address of his LLC. The content was straightforward: demand for full disclosure of all transaction documents, gift records, and title transfer history relating to the property, and a reservation of rights to pursue legal action for concealment of marital assets. That evening, my mother's call came. Her voice was an octave higher than usual, rattled. "Nora, what are you doing? You hired a lawyer. You're suing Daniel." Are you trying to tear this family apart? I was in my study, laptop open, the call on speaker. I'm not tearing the family apart, Mom. I'm protecting my own legal rights. Daniel bought a house with someone else's money, Vanessa's money, and I knew nothing about it. If you think that's tearing the family apart, then you should ask your younger daughter why she did it. A long silence on the other end. Then Patricia's voice dropped to that hushed, conspiratorial tone she used for private conversations. Vanessa said she was just giving Daniel investment advice. She said she had no idea it would affect your marriage. She says it was completely innocent. Mom. I cut her off. Tell me, does a completely innocent person walk out to the porch on Thanksgiving night and say to me, Daniel never put your name on it. You don't even have a bargaining chip? The line went dead quiet. She said that to you? Patricia's voice suddenly sounded very small, very thin. I have it recorded, I said. Do you want to hear it? A long pause. Then, no. I don't. She hung up. She didn't call back that night. Neither did Robert. By late January, Carter had secured the last piece of the puzzle, the bank statement of the gift transfer from Vanessa to Daniel. The amount was $197,000. The memo line read, Long-term investment cooperation. But Carter had traced the source of that money back 3 months before the transfer. It had been pulled from a client prepayment in Vanessa's own real estate account. And that client prepayment had come from a shell company called Linden Capital, registered to Vanessa's husband, Michael Reed. In other words, the gift was actually a roundabout cash shuffle. Vanessa used her husband's company to funnel money through her own account, laundered it as a personal gift, and transferred it to Daniel for the down payment. She went through all those hoops, because she didn't want my name on any paper connected to Michael's, which would have exposed her use of money that belonged, at least in part, to their joint marital assets. That wasn't just concealment of marital property. That was a liability grenade for Vanessa and Michael. Without a signed agreement between them, Michael could legally claim that money back in a divorce. And Vanessa had put that money, implicating her husband, into a house for her sister's husband. One thread pulling 3 people's lives. I locked that copy of the statement in my safe, alongside the recordings, the medical record screenshot, and Rachel's chat logs. The fishbone folder now contained enough to make any judge see the whole chain.